In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us. And so, Mother Mary, we beg you to intervene on behalf of the people who will have an opportunity to see this, and share with them the words in a way that if there's something that I say that is not helpful, well, you can transform that, Mother Mary, and we know that you can and you will do that, because Jesus wants us to be in his will, that we are. You want us to be where we are, what we're doing. Here we are. So now we offer all of this time as our part in this effort to share with people the blessing of the pro-life movement. And as we do that, we'll do the best that we can. We'll know with your help that it'll be productive and useful for the purposes that you have in mind for this. For we ask it in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, just as we were baptized.
Thank you for being willing to sit down with us. And would you just mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your home life when you were younger, maybe how many siblings you had, a little bit about that?
Well, my life began in Oakland, California, and when I was 6 months old, my family moved to assist my grandfather, who was in his 60s and failing health, and who was trying to manage a ranch, 800-acre ranch, that was a homestead by his father in 1892. So I was raised basically my first 16 years were on a homestead, on a ranch, a cattle ranch, and I was baptized as a Catholic in Oakland, and I was raised in the mountains, and it happened that when I was about 5 years old, World War II began. And so during World War II, the people that were in the mountains were pretty isolated because there was rationing for tires and gas, and there were almost no real tires. They came out with something called artificial rubber that had up in the mountains it'd last 3,000 or 4,000 miles if you were lucky. So I never really got much opportunity to go to church during those early years, during the war years, and so I had very little childhood experience of the faith. And so when I was 7 years old, when I was in the 7th grade, my father was faced with losing the ranch because the river on which we were living was a tremendous flood hazard to the people downstream, and then the water was very desirable for agricultural use, and so it was that the federal government decided to build a dam, and the dam would take all of our lower property that was level, and so we had to decide whether we were going to be moving up on the very steep mountainside or whether we were just going to move somewhere else. So my dad took kind of a sabbatical from the ranch, and that was 1947 and 1948, and he was a Christian, but never became a Catholic. And so when he was married to my mother, he had to promise that he would raise the children Catholic, and his greatest virtue was integrity. And so he had decided that he was going to put us in a Catholic school. And so he moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which was my mother's hometown, for this year in the 7th grade, for him sabbatical to make this decision, and for me a chance to learn about my faith. And so my sister and I both were introduced to the Catholic faith that year. She was a 5th grader and I was a 7th grader. And during that year, a particular incident happened. in the school, everyone went to Mass in the morning and then went to school. And so the rules in those days were that you had to fast from midnight if you were going to receive communion. So the children were all, no one went to communion because they all ate breakfast and then they'd come to Mass and then go to school. And so the nuns had a tradition that the children would say a rosary during Mass. And so all the time the priest was doing things up on the altar that I couldn't understand because I'd never really been to Mass, all the time he was doing these things up on the altar, we were saying a rosary, and I was very curious about what was going on up on the altar. And so I asked my dad if I could go to the early Mass one day, and that was a 6 o'clock Mass. And so he said, well, at that time in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, you had to have a fire in the furnace. So he said, if you'll start the fire in the furnace, and we were cooking on a wood stove in the house, so, and get the fire started in the wood stove so Mom can make breakfast, you can go to Mass. As long as you're back here in about 35 or 40 minutes, it'll be just fine. So that's what I did. I got up a little early and started the fire and the furnace and the stove and went to Mass. And I couldn't believe the difference. And I went in through the side door to this beautiful church in the old sort of pseudo-Gothic style, a beautiful church. I went in through the side door and it was almost all dark except just the altar was flooded with light. And it was like my heart had stopped. It was so beautiful. I'd never seen anything like that. And the side that I went in had a picture of a lady with angels on each side and a little baby in her arms, and I just figured that must be Jesus and his mother. And it was so beautiful. It was an icon, a kind of a Greek icon style of picture. And I later found out it was Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And she kind of became my special lady right away. It was so beautiful. And then the altar, and St. Joseph was on the other side. So I got into the church, and it was dark. I couldn't see more than 4, 5, 6 pews back. And there was this kind of muttering going on way in the back and rattling. There was this rattling going on. I later found out there were 4 or 5 little old ladies that came every morning to that 6 o'clock Mass, and they said the rosary just like they had learned, I guess, years ago from their school. Anyhow, so I had the people in the back saying the rosary, and I sat in the front pew right in front of that altar, and I watched that priest, and I just was enthralled. I had never seen anything like that. I was up close, but he said words that I could not understand, and I knew by then that that was Latin, and I knew I wouldn't understand it. And so, but I was enthralled. That's the only thing I can say. It was so beautiful, and they were so reverent, and the altar boys came out and served, and so when I got home that morning, Grandma was in the living room in a rocking chair, and she always said the rosary there, rocking back and forth. And so I interrupted her rosary, and I told her how thrilled I was, how beautiful it was, but I said I just couldn't figure out what it was. Well, she said, I have this St. Mary's Missal. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, it has all of it in Latin, and the other side has it in English. She said, if you'd like to borrow it, I'll let you use it. And I said, well, I have to ask Dad if I can go tomorrow. So I did. And that began, for me, daily communion, which, like, I just fell in love with the church. So I went every day, and as it got closer and closer to Christmas, it started to snow, and that year was a record snow in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And one day, my dad and I got out and cleared the snow off the woodshed, because the woodshed was just a lean-to, and we were afraid it was going to cave in. There was 3 feet of snow on the top of that shed. So we cleared it off, and in the next 2 days there was 3 feet of snow on the top of that thing. We had a blizzard, and I was going every day, and I was just thrilled to go to church in that snow. So about the second day, I guess, that the snow was coming down, it was so deep that I was actually walking, and the snow plowed it up, and it was hard. I was walking at the level of the roofs of the cars because the snow plow had And it was like I'd died and gone to heaven. It was a wonderful time in the snow, and it was snowing down, and the street lights lighting the snow, and it was dark. And I walked into the church, and I went to my usual place, and I was waiting for Mass to start, and I didn't have a watch at that time. I presume the priest was a little late. Anyhow, he walked out on the altar, and he waved to me, and I could tell he was waving to me, and I didn't know, I didn't want to talk in front of Jesus, and he kept waving to me, and so finally I decided, got up, came out of the pew, and he says, "I want you to serve for me." And I said, "Father, I can't serve." He said, "Yes, you can." He said, "You know what? You've been here enough. You know what to do." I said, "No, Father." I said, I don't know the words, and if I knew them, I couldn't even say them because I don't know this stuff." And he said, "That's all right." He said, "I tell you what." He says, "You serve." He says, "The altar boys are not here, and I need to have altar boys, and if I'm going to have Mass, so I want you to serve." And I said, "Father, I can't. I don't know the words." And he says, "When you don't know the words," he says, "you just bend over and mumble." And he says, "I'll say the words." So I served my first Mass. After that, there was no altar boys coming. And later on, when I thought about it, years later, I think maybe he just told them, "Don't bother to come," because he became my fast friend. And so I served that 6 o'clock Mass probably at least a month or so, and then the sister that was in charge of altar boys discovered that I was serving the Mass, and it was like the end of the world for me. And so I went back to the pew, and she got the altar boys out there where they belong. But anyhow, that introduced me to the priest, and the priest and I had lots of conversations because I didn't know anything about the church. And so just to give you an idea how much I knew about the church, it was my first time ever. First time I saw a nun, I thought, "Gosh, she looked like a penguin," you know. She had this thing around her head, and she was such a nice lady. And her name was Sister Julie. I even remember her. So she was so nice to me. And so just to give you an idea how ignorant I was, but I wanted to learn. You had to recite in class verbatim exactly from the Baltimore Catechism 3 questions every day, and it went from 3 to 6 to 9, 3 each day, and you had to memorize those. And well, I was a 7th grader. These kids had been doing this for 6 years before I got in that class. They'd been doing it, and the catechism was, you go 3 years in one and 3 years in another, and they all just a little bigger. I had to memorize them from scratch, and I am terrible at memory. As anybody who knows me knows, I forget. I have the best forgettery in the family, and I got some really good forgetters in my family. So anyhow, so that year was torment for me. I'd sit just praying the sister would ask me one of them, because I could get one of them usually, but 3 was way out of my class. But she was always very comforting of the fact that I just couldn't remember them. Anyhow, at the end of the year, they give out awards. And they gave out awards, and it was a high school, grammar school, so it was all day long giving out awards. And all the parents are there, and everybody's there. And so in the end, I was the last one to get an award. And I got an award that was for being the most improved student in the class, because even one question would have made me the most improved. And that kind of set the stage for my life, for the way I do things. But anyhow, she gave me a little plastic statue. In fact, it wasn't even plastic, it was that stuff that they had before they had plastic, whatever that is. Anyhow, it was a plastic statue of St. Gerard. Now, I had no idea who St. Gerard was, except that my middle name was Gerard. And I found out about, probably 50 years ago now, when I first got introduced to the pro-life movement, I found out that St. Gerard was the patron of the pro-life movement. He's the patron of women in crisis, because he had a woman in crisis accuse him of being the father of her child, and his bishop told him that he couldn't say Mass anymore, and he couldn't hear confessions, and he had to say, other than saying Mass in private, he had to say Mass in private, but he couldn't preach, So he just basically exiled him from the priesthood, and he lived that. He never revealed that until the woman herself, in her old age, told the truth and released him from his interdiction, I guess is what it's called. He lived that most of his life he lived all by himself, saying the Mass by himself. So anyhow, that's my patron saint, you know. So I still have that statue. It's in my bedroom right now, and it's precious to me, and it is not damaged. I just have always saved that because I was the most improved student for sure. So anyhow, that's the kind of relation I had with the priest, because I had questions. I had never talked about God. I never thought about him until then, you know. Really, I was a wild kid in the mountains. I hunted and fished, and you know, I did all those things that kids do in the mountains, and I just found out that all those mountains and those fish were created, and I committed my first mortal sin that year, and I didn't know what to do about it. I just was. So I had really basically my first confession to that priest, because Dad had made sure that I had gone to First Communion. I had a 2-week course in the summer, and it was so important to me that I don't even remember the First Communion. I don't remember the first confession, because there were so many other things kids to learn and all that kind of stuff. I didn't remember it. I don't remember it today. But I remember that year meeting Jesus. And I know when I met Jesus and fell in love with him in the church. And when I fell in love with him, Father told me something that my mother had said was true. And he said, you really need to accept that in order to continue in the faith. He says, you just need to accept it. And my mother said, look, Ronnie, I don't hunt up all the answers to things. You asked me too many questions. She said, I'm just telling you, if the church says it, it's true. And I said, but Mom, I don't mind if it's true. I want to know the answer. I want to know why. And she said, I don't know why. I can't figure that stuff out. I don't have time to figure that stuff out. If the church teaches it, it's true. And so that kind of cut off all the questions that I had until I met Father O'Connor that 7th grade, and I remember his name. And I don't remember many things, but that guy was there when I met Jesus, and I asked him countless questions. And the big one was when I finally realized that I'd committed a mortal sin and that I was going to go to hell if I didn't do something about it. And I knew, I felt it. I was so sad. And he taught me what forgiveness is, taught me to accept that forgiveness. And when he did, I said, Father, you know, I said, God knew from all eternity everything. He knew I was going to commit that sin. And how could he create me knowing I was going to go to hell? I said, if he's a good God, how can he be a good God and do that? So Father tried as hard as he could. And I don't suppose we had any less than 100 times that we got together over the next 6 months, because then I left. But he never could answer that question for me. He said, you got to accept it. It's what the church teaches. He said, I've taught you all I can teach you. He said, you're going to have to read this. And he gave me a book, St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. And he showed me in the middle of it where where it deals with this question and answers it. And I won't pretend to be able to answer it in this. Basically, for me, the answer was, you know, God knows your birthday too, but He didn't cause you to have a birthday. He just says you could have your celebration and your birthday cake, but that's a decision that your mom made, and he said that's the way it is. He said he doesn't force you to confess your sins. He says if you want to choose to go to hell, you can do it. But he says, you're not going to do that. He says, God's merciful, and you're not going to choose that. I know you're not. So just come to confession and get it out of your system. And then forget it. Don't keep thinking about it. So anyhow, that's how I met Jesus. And I have never, ever doubted him. I've committed sins, lots of them, and had to go to confession. But that encounter with Jesus and his priest, my pastor, and that was my meeting in Jesus, and I've never had a doubt since then. The only thing is I've always known that I'm just not smart enough to be able to answer all those questions. Just not smart enough, that's all. But it's there, and particularly it's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The answer's there, and if it's not there, it's in Thomas Aquinas. And I took Thomas Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles to Vietnam, my first tour, because I have read and I love St. Thomas Aquinas, because he's very careful, very logical, but he's way above my pay grade. But when he tells you, by the time I get done with his argument, I say, no doubt, that's it, and then I forget it. I don't pretend to remember his answer, but I've done that. I've answered every question that comes along to me. Lots of people have asked me questions that I couldn't answer, and I'll puzzle around and I'll go find somebody to give me a clue where to look. And I'm a reader, that kind of a reader. And I've never had a question that hasn't been answered affirmatively from the church. So I met Jesus. He's been true to me ever since. And so out of that year, my life has radically changed. But it wasn't too long before I kind of changed in the wrong way. I actually was 17 years old and my dad was killed in an automobile accident. And we went to live with an uncle. My mother and I went to live with an uncle. Most of all because she needed help grieving. And my mother never really recovered, losing her husband at age 43. She never married, she just didn't date, she grieved. They were one, and her half was gone. And so she really suffered, and so out of that experience, I just became very aggressively independent. And it was a period of time there where I never lost the faith. I knew what I was doing was offending God, and I knew if I died I was going to hell. I just knew it. It wasn't. And it took me 2 years probably, or 3, to get even to a point where I could go to church again. And I went through a time when I was really doing things. I worked for a guy who would give me a fifth of whiskey as pay. I worked Friday nights in a service station, and the guy, part of my pay was always a fifth of whiskey, and I could drink that thing in a night. And I'd be blind drunk. I'd come home driving. It's just stupid stuff. And I know that offended God, and I've never confessed it for 2 years. And out of that time, I really developed, because the person who killed my father had gone through a stop sign at something like 60 miles an hour in downtown and rolled the car over twice. And it was a closed casket funeral, and I never saw my dad. And during that time, I'd been really, as a teenager, I'd been rebellious against him, and I said things that I've regretted ever since. And so that was a really, really hard time for me. And I had a lot of anger. And, really, the thing that saved me, of course, is the faith, knowing what's right. But I met the girl, my wife, when we left the ranch and went to live with an uncle, and we drove all the way from California to Seattle, Washington, and I was driving in my little 5-window Ford, and my sister was with me, and we took us a couple days. We stayed in a hotel, and 2 of us, and Mom stayed down there to kind of put Dad's things away and things, and then she flew up with my uncle. Anyhow, my sister and I stopped in front of my cousin's house, and my cousin walked out the front door, not knowing it was me. Walked out the front door, and a little girl came behind her wearing blue pedal pushers and saddle shoes, and had a ponytail. She had a white blouse, and she was a cute little thing, but I thought she was about 12, 13 years old, just a little thing. But that was my wife. She's the best friend of my cousin. And it took her 2 years to trap me, but she did it. And we were married when I was 20 and she was 19. And both sets of parents said it's never going to last. They didn't want us to do it, but they blessed our marriage, and Mom came to the wedding, and Nancy's folks did, but they really didn't approve of me. I was a Catholic, and they thought that I would ruin Nancy, but as it turned out, we just celebrated our 65th wedding anniversary on St. Patrick's Day, this last St. Patrick's Day. So I think it's going to last. It's 65 years now, and that's what saved me. Nancy was just a really the right person for me, and God knew what I needed, and I could tell she was right. I knew. I think it took her about. I think she and my sister and my cousin all conspired. It was about a year that I'd been just dating anybody I wanted to, and I was a wild man. And I don't know why she was willing to put up with it, but and especially being a Catholic and her folks being so put out about her being with a Catholic. There was lots of acrimony about that for her. She suffered a lot. But anyhow, she stuck with it, and I think it must have been about a year and a quarter. Well, it might have been a year. But anyhow, they all got together and had a Christmas party, and that was our first date. It was kind of it just was a setup. It was a wonderful one. And so anyhow, that started our kind of serious romance. And so we were married. It took us about 2 or 2.5 years to tie the knot, but we did. And we did it just a year before I graduated. I think I was just entering the junior year in college then. And so we were married, and then 18 months later my first daughter came along, and I graduated midterm, so I graduated almost the same time. I was finished with school a year that she was almost the same time she was born, and it was just time. I was in ROTC, and I was commissioned in the military, and I went into service in '58. The service was very good to me. They sent me through flight school, and I loved flying. I loved driving anything like a bulldozer or anything that would move. I loved to drive it and figure out how it worked, and so I loved flight school and flight. And so I was sent to Fort Lewis and as a pilot. And while I was there, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to fly an observer of the first scouting tests that were going on for aero scouts, for flying scouts. And at that time I was a fixed wing pilot, flew fixed wing aircraft, and he sat in the back seat, and I flew him for, I don't know, a month and a half of tests. And of course I was in what's called an L-19, which is a little two-place Army plane, and he was in the back seat, and I used to take him, I'd land him out on the roads and things out in the field and strips, and I just took him where he wanted to go the best I could. But I was so jealous because I couldn't fly those little helicopters down there, and they were flying down between the trees and over the sticks and rocks and up creeks, and so I loved that. And I said, I got to do that. So in 1961 I went to helicopter school, and then I went to Europe, and it was the Cold War, it was a Cuban crisis, and a lot of that stuff. And so we were up on the border, and I had a tank company. And so that was my job as a tank company commander, is to be up on the border, and we figured that the best we could do is delay them maybe 3 days, and we would be finished. we were a throwaway up on the border outfit. Our battalion had a line, and you could just look up at where they were going to come across. And they used to, the Russians and the Germans, the East Germans, would get together and get a big column of tanks, and they'd run it up to the border, and we'd all be out there with our tanks ready, and they'd turn. Anyhow, it was a Cold War, and that's when Vietnam heated up. And the first time I heard about people going to Vietnam, I said, "Where's that?" I hadn't even known it. It was a new name to me. It was all Siam to me back in those days, and French Indochina. And so I had heard about it, but then they had this test going for Air Mobile Division. And I was really watching that because they had air cavalry in it. They had some really interesting flying, and that's what I wanted to do. And so it wasn't long before I had orders to that division, and they changed the name to the 1st Cav Division, which made me really happy. I'm going to a Cav outfit. And then in the interim, I had been moved from being a company commander. Unfortunately, we had a series of tests of my outfit, and my company came out #1 in Europe, and then my tank was the #1 tank in Europe for shooting and moving, and so they picked me out, took my company away from me. I only had it for a year, and I was hoping to have it for 3, and it broke my heart, but they made me an aide to the general, and so I was working for this general, and I got these orders, and he canceled them. He said, I need you. He said, I need to have you here. So he canceled my orders to the division. It broke my heart. That's where I wanted to go. So since I wasn't going to go to the division, when I finally got loose from that general became the chief of staff of the Army. So he was a guy that did what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. And he was one tough guy, and he wouldn't let me go. So anyhow, when I finally got done, by then the cavalry had been in Vietnam a year, 1st Cav Division, and they'd really shown what helicopters could do. I mean, it was just astounding, the difference between what they could do. And so it was when Johnson started bombing in the north and then added troops into Vietnam. Well, he sent 2 divisions to the 25th and the 4th Division, infantry divisions, and those divisions were given one little tiny air cav troop, just not even a fifth of what the air cav had. And they assigned me to that one troop, so that's where I went. My first tour, I went over, and I commanded a scout platoon, which is kind of the little bubble helicopters. So I learned what it was to be a scout, and I learned what it cost. And so when I came back, by then I was a daily communicant, and by then all the chaplains in the division knew that if they called me on the radio, we'd have whoever was Catholic in my outfit, we'd all be together, and we'd go to mass with him. So they'd call me, and so we had mass. Not every day, but I don't think I ever missed more than 2 or 3, 4 days in a row. And always Sundays, we were always able to get to mass somehow, and right in between missions or something. Anyhow, so when I got back, we were moved from. I'd left my wife while I was in Vietnam in Seattle. Well, we moved to Marin County, and in Marin County, I met some people who were pro-life, and I'd never even heard about pro-life. That was in 1967, and these people came out, and I heard about them through the church, and they said we need to write letters to the Supreme Court and get them to hear this case, because everybody has a right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution says that they're supposed to enforce it. So I wrote a letter to every one of the Supreme Court justices, and in doing that I had to do a little research, and I found out that my state, California, had just signed abortion on demand into law in California. And I said, my state, how can they do that? they have a constitution that's like our federal one. We're supposed to protect life. And so that started me in the pro-life movement. So in 1967, I really didn't know much about what to do, but I thought, well, if the Supreme Court won't do anything, what we do is we need to make laws. So let's make a law, a life amendment. So it's real clear that everybody's life is supposed to be protected. So I joined that. It was called a PAC. LAPAC, Life Amendment Political Action Committee. Judy Brown and a guy named, what was his name? I can't remember. Sorry. Anyhow, two of them came out and gave a lecture, a talk. And I joined right then. So I've been a member of that, and that was a political action committee, basically. And I started with organizing voters and also going and talking to the legislators. So, and I really had to be careful of it because I was in the military, and the military has to be very careful to do any kind of political work outside of the military. And there's a good reason for it, because coups are kind of the way that governments change. You get one of these darn tin pot dictators out of the military, some general that trying to save the country, and he's trying to do what he thinks is right, but then he gets power and suddenly people are against him, and he's used to being a military guy, so the next thing you know, they're shooting at each other in the country. And you just look at Venezuela, or you look at any of the South American, look at the Middle Americans, it's always some junta, and it's either that or a religious outfit, and Muslims, it's a religion. So there's a good reason why the military should stay out of politics. But I was not going to stay out of saving lives. I'd seen them been killed in Vietnam, and I sent body bags home and wrote letters to mothers, and it broke my heart to think that these kids that were aborted didn't even get that. They just, in those days, they just throw them in the garbage. And it just broke my heart. So I used to go to I went to Falante, and I've been in the office of so many of these guys that have graduated and become pro-death people, claim to be pro-life and changed. And so what I found out with politics is it doesn't work. But I did it, and I tried it, and I spent hours and hours organizing. I had stacks of, in fact I had boxes, big boxes, I brought home and I distributed to people, and they were supposed to call all these people. They were voters who had registered Republican, and in those days Republicans were first party to claim to be pro-life. And so we did all this organizing in San Francisco County and Marin. I had both of those. I was running 2 counties, and I don't know, I had hundreds, thousands of names. And these people were called and offered rides and whatever you need to get to the polls because we got to vote. Well, even back then, California was already, you could just see the tricks that were going on and the stuff, the lies and things. And so I did that, and then I went back to Vietnam in 18 months or 20 months, I guess it took to get me there. And by then, we had just, Nancy had our 5th baby, and she said, I don't know if I can do this again. And we decided when we were first married that I was going to be making enough money that we could support 6 children. And so we decided that, what kids do, they think they can control God, and so we decided that, well, we were actually in bed one night, and that's when she said, I just can't have another baby. She said, she almost lost her twice. And she had to have, I don't know, gallons of blood, and it scared us to death. And so I said, you ever thought, think about adopting? And she said, I was just going to ask you if we could just adopt our 6th child. So we started the adoption process. Well, by the time it got done, the last hearing, they were going to just say, well, now you can keep him for 2 years. And I told the judge, I said, I understand what the rules are. I said, but I'm about to go to Vietnam. And I said, you know, if I die in Vietnam, there won't be any benefits for this child. I said, unless it's permanent. It has to be permanent to have for this child. And it scares me to death because I really don't want Nancy to have this adoption go through and then not be able to take care of the child's medical purposes if I get killed. And the judge said, we don't solve that. He said, permanent. And he went like that. And the social workers went like that and looked around, and the judge had made a decision. And so we had number 6 almost the same time we got number 5, only he was already 3.5 years old, so he's in between. So it worked out real good, and so we raised 6 children, and sure enough God let us have 6, and that was the end of having children. But anyhow, so I went back to Vietnam for a second tour, and I didn't do any pro-life work, and I just was plain. I had what's called a troop. A troop is a company-sized unit, a couple hundred people, and I had 27 helicopters, and the people to man them, and then I had a rifle platoon. So it was a busy time, and that time I took tapes with me. Because I'd found out that a lot of the guys had these tape recorders, and so I bought a tape recorder and took a tape with me. And I listened to a course that was designed to create lay Eucharistic ministers. Now they didn't have them yet, but that's what I was listening to, a course that was being designed, and they had taped the whole thing. And it was a summer course, a 3-month summer school course where they were full-time at the University of San Francisco. It was Jesuit theologians that were teaching these guys, and it was wonderful. It was really a good break for me. I could listen. I could come in after flying all day and have an hour of those tapes or something like that, and it was just like a different world for me for a little while. So it was really a good break for me. Anyhow, so that was my religion, and of course I only had 6 months of command, and at that time they relieved you of command and they'd move you to some other job. So I went from the troop to the squadron executive officer. Now squadron is a battalion, and this was an air cav squadron, and so we had about, I don't know, 800 or 900 men, and I was the XO, and so I was just kind of the guy that sat in the office and pretended I knew what was going on for a year, for 6 months. Then I came back, and so since that time I've had assignments. I was sent to a school to teach, and then I went to Commander General Staff College to learn for a year, 9 months actually, and then I was assigned to teach there, which was at Commander General Staff College. And so there I became involved again with pro-life work, and at that time marriage encounter was a big part of sort of evangelizing, and so my wife and I both became involved in that, and Curcio, of course, we had already been involved in Curcio, which was an evangelical outreach, and the one we were involved in was involved just anyone who was Christian could go that wanted to. So out of that I had kind of a platform to talk about these little babies that were not even given body bags to come home. You know, they were just thrown away. And out of that, then I came to the University of San Francisco to teach. So I taught almost half my years in the military. Once I got out of the company grade level where I could have opportunity to be with my men, which are the best jobs there are, those company level jobs, I was teaching, and so it was a pretty darn good place to do pro-life work. So I became involved with it there, and stayed in touch with it as much as I could. And the more I worked with pro-life, the more I found that political work just wasn't going to do it. But I always maintained that it was a venue to teach people. It was a venue. Political work was a venue to teach people, and some of them are not teachable, but you really have to think when you write to a congressman or something like that, he may not ever see that letter, but there will be some young person who is really wants to have the political process do good things. They're really good young people, want to go. Most of them have been taught by these airheads in the universities that are teaching them just plain garbage, but they're willing to listen and learn. And so when you write a letter, you're not writing it to the politician, you're writing it to a youngster that's an intern. And so I keep writing as much as I can, but I don't expect it to change politically. So then along came something called Operation Rescue. At that time, I just retired from the military. And when you retire from the military, you have to learn to live on half of what you couldn't live on before. Anytime you retire, you got to learn. Usually people that retire, their kids are kind of up and out, maybe in college or something, so there's still a problem. But my kids weren't up and out. I still had, I think, 4 of my own, and then we had a house full of kids anyhow. And so Nancy and Mary got together, and they had a daycare. So that kind of supplement what was going on, and I just more and more became involved with pro-life work. And my mother died, and she got throat cancer. And the last 6 months I kind of lived with her because she could hardly talk at all. And with throat cancer, it's a terrible way to die. You finally starve to death because you can't eat. And so it took her about 9 months, and it was the best time we ever had together, the two of us. I mean, I watched, what's that stupid show where they turn a wheel or something like that, and they get a question.
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, Wheel of Fortune. I watched that, and I watched quiz shows, and I couldn't stand the darn things. And she'd have the answer for them, and we'd have these conversations. So it was so good for us because I'd been in the military and I'd never been around her for 25 years. So, she'd come and visit, and I'm a terrible writer to my family. I'm just terrible. So it was a wonderful time. It was kind of like being a baby again. I was with her all the time. And then when she died, I came home, and I was kind of at loose ends, to be truthful with you. And I went down I had an office downstairs, and at the time, I actually had 5 different businesses that I was working with, including the homestead that I'd been raised on, that I was trying to manage. And I looked at my desk, and it was covered with paperwork, because 9 months I'd only been hit and miss the little things that I had to do, like file taxes and stuff. And so I looked at that desk, and I just shook my head, and I just took a magazine off the top, because my daughter had just stacked everything on my desk. So I had letters and magazines and just piled. And I opened it up, and I was reading the magazine, and it had an article about some guy named Randy Terry that had done a rescue in Dobbs Ferry, and I had never heard of rescue before. And basically the article said, if you're pro-life, and somebody's going to die today, and you can do something about it, where are you? And I thought to myself, yeah, where am I? I've tried everything else. And so I went up and sat down in the living room with Mary and Nancy, and they were supposed to be doing daycare, but they were in the living room at the time. And I said, did you see that article? And I didn't even tell them what article. Mary said, the article on rescue? She knew I'd go to the pro-life one and something. And she said, what are you going to do about it? Mary did. And I said, what are you talking about? What am I going to do about it? She said, well, did you see they're going to have one down in San Jose? I said, yeah. do about it? I said, well, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I said, I'm not going to just jump on something that I don't know anything about. She said, well, why don't you call him? She's still doing that, you know, in Life Legal Defense Foundation. She is a person on the phone. I mean, when she was a kid, we used to tease her that the phone grew out of her ear because she used our phone so much. I finally put her on a timer, and I turn it over, and if she exceeded it, she was banned from the phone. So what did she do? She went out and babysat and got money and bought her own phone line. So she's had her own phone since she was probably 13 years old or 14. So anyhow, Mary is a spur. It's actually a thorn in my side. But God knows what he's doing. So I said, well, all right, I'll call him up and find out. She said, you're just going to call him? I said, yeah, I'm not going to do anything. I don't know what it is. She said, okay. So I went downstairs so I didn't have her listening, and got on one of those days we didn't have cell phones. Got on my phone and called. I called the number that was there, and I got a hold of a guy named Jeff White. Now, if you've ever met Jeff White, he and I have probably as good a relationship as any two guys can have. The two of us really hit it off. But at first call, he said, yeah, he says, we're going to have a meeting down here, and it's going to be this week, and you're welcome to come. And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to come down and see what you guys are doing. And he said, I don't want you. He says, you're not coming to see. We got things to do, and I don't have time to waste with people who just want to look. And I said, well, thank you very much, but you know, I don't do things until I got some idea what it is. I said, you know, I've been shot at, and lots of time, almost every time it was a surprise. I said, I don't just go there to get surprised. He said, well, then don't bother to come. He says, just you read about it later. And I said, thank you very much, and I hung up. So I thought about it for a little while, and I went upstairs, probably to go get a beer or something. And Mary said, well, what'd you say to him? I said, well, you just told me don't come down if I just want to watch. And I said, I'm not going down unless I know what I'm doing. And she said, oh. She said, what, are you scared? And I said, no, I'm not scared. I'm just not somebody that's just going to go down and do something, or tell somebody I'm going to do something. And she said, why don't you just go down? She said, it can't hurt you. So I thought about it for a while, and so I called him back up, and he said, if you want to look at something, he says, fly to New York and go look at Randy Terry. He's going to do a rescue in New York. I said, fly to New York? That was the end of that conversation. And so I went upstairs and I said, that rescue, I said, they're just crazy. I said, he wants me to fly to New York now if I want to look at something. She said, well, why don't you get on a plane and go fly to New York? I said, no. She said, you can fly space available, it won't cost you anything. I said, well, yeah, but it cost me, you know, a week's time to go there, and I don't want to go to New York. I hate New York. So Mary said, look, put your money where your mouth is. You're either pro-life or you're not. You want to save a baby? Yeah. Well, believe it or not, I flew to New York. Actually, it wasn't New York. It was called Prussian town. It was Philadelphia. By the time I got there, it was a real mess because flying military, you never know what's going to happen. You know, these pilots, they tell you one thing and go somewhere else, because I was one of them. So anyhow, wound up there, and we went to a rally, and it was a rally that had a presidential candidate, Randy Terry, and Bernard Nathanson, who had just quit doing abortions and was no longer the operative founding member of the National Abortion Rights Action League, the guy that lied about the numbers of abortions to get Roe versus Wade passed. and he had just converted, and his wife was running for president. And so we had quite a array of speakers there with them, pro-life speakers. And the next day there was a rescue in, just north of a little Prussia, and so I did my first rescue, and it was quite an interesting experience, that first rescue. But we saved a couple, 3 babies, and I thought, you know, God's law says if you can save a baby, you got to do that. So when we did the rescue, they took us over to a ball field. They booked us and then turned us loose. So I got on a bus and went back to where they were doing the rescue, and I rescued again, same day. And I turned around 3 times that day. I had 3 tickets to go see the judge. I figured, what is it? If I'm going to be here, I might as well finish the day. So I did. And after that, I came back and I told Nancy and Mary about it. So Nancy and Mary and my other daughter Ann, we all flew to New York and did a rescue with Randy Terry in New York at the main building of Planned Parenthood, the home place. And in that one, Randy, was it Randy or? Yeah, I think Randy says, go get underneath that bus. So it was a paddy wagon. Go get underneath that paddy wagon and grab a hold of it and stop it from driving, because it's full of pro-lifers. And I said, no, I'm doing a rescue. And he says, go over and do that. I said, all right, you're the boss. So I went over and got underneath there, and I was underneath that bus, and we kept it there for quite a while before they could drag us out. It took them a while. They were very angry police by the time we got done. But the New York police were really professional about it. They were angry, but they still kept their cool, and they just did what they had to do. And so we did a rescue, and that was where I met Joan Andrews. She was in that rescue. And Joan Andrews is quite a famous rescuer, and she still is working in the rescue area. She's a wonderful lady. But anyhow, that was the beginning of my rescues, and I did 5 years. I did that. I went to Atlanta, and I met a priest named Father Westland, and he was just forming the Lambs of Christ. So I joined that group, and we rescued, I don't know, we did over 100 rescues, I think. We were in jail, I think it was a little over 100 times with a priest, and it was wonderful because we were able to smuggle in hosts and wine. There was always somebody that would get it in there, and so almost every time, if he was in there with us, we'd have mass, daily mass, and sometimes the jailer would let us invite all the prisoners that were Catholic to come, or one of the ones that wanted to come to mass, and we'd have big mass inside in the jail, and if they didn't, if they had us, a lot of times in New York, for example, they'd separate people out, and in Tennessee, I think we all had individual cells somewhere. I was in a maximum security with a couple of guys that had murdered their wives and stuff, and so we really had some interesting experiences there. And of course we didn't get mass then, so I'd missed daily communion then. But when we were out with the priest there, we had daily communion every day, and we said the divine office, it was like being on a retreat, going to mass. And then when you go to jail, they'd smuggle a breviary in or a Bible. Sometimes they'd give you a Bible, but about half the time these guys were really kind of opposed to the giving Christians Bibles. And it was kind of sad, but well, it's not usually you could get one in somehow. And it'd be like a retreat. You'd read the Bible and pray the rosary and pray your... Anyhow, so I did that for 5 years, and we had a crisis with one of my children, a health crisis. And I was in jail at the time, and Nancy called and said, I need you home. And I said, they haven't even sentenced yet. We've been here 3 months, and they hadn't sentenced us yet, and it looked like they were going to sentence us to a pretty long one. So I said, call we had the outside team, call the outside team and tell them to, start the prayer chain working. And the next morning, the guy released all of us. It was dead on a miracle. She needed me home and put the prayer chain to work. And we had several miracles like that kind of just happened. If you needed something, Our Lady got you out. That's just the way it was. And Father was a special priest. He was an old military guy who had retired and a late vocation. And his wife had been killed just after he retired. And so he had gone through all the sadness and difficulty, and he was one tough priest. And when he needed something, he'd tell Our Lady, he said, "This is what we need." And he'd start the prayer train working in jail and out. And we got it. Anyhow, I was out the next morning, and I didn't have any money. And the nuns got together there and held a big potluck to welcome us out of the jail, because they'd been praying for us and walking around the jail and stuff. And it was the pro-life group up there. And so we all were smelly lambs. I mean, we were in jail all this time, and our clothes that we had gone in with were in a box somewhere in the jail, and by the time we got them out, they were moldy. I mean, they were awful. So I can't imagine anybody wanting to associate with us, but they were all walking around and talking and eating, and this lady walked up to me, a stranger, and she said, "I know you need money." She said, "Here's $200. And I said, "No, I'm sorry, it was $100. I said, "No." I said, "I can't take that money." She said, "Take it." She walked away and handed me $100. And so I had $100, and so one of the people that was a local said, "I'll give you a ride down to the airport. Let's see if we can get a flight out." And would you believe the ticket I had? I had something like $1, and the ticket was, I think it was $98 or something like that, flight from there to home. And I was home that night. She said, "I can't get you on." I said, "Is there something like standby or something that I can just wait and see if somebody doesn't show up?" She said, "Yeah, you can do that if you want to." I said, "Okay." So she gave me the ticket, and I caught a plane and got home, and I was home in time to get my son out of the hospital. So that's the way God works, and it's been that way. I mean, I could tell you times in combat. I spend the rest of the time here. So anyhow, that was the end of rescue for me, and it's interesting because rescue kind of ended almost exactly the same time. The rescue we had done, we had worked really hard just to get enough people to close a door, and then the police had figured out how to get us. We had neck locks and all kinds of things to make it last, and I don't think there was more than 16 of us, or 15 or 16, I can't remember, maybe 18. Anyhow, we put most of us at the front door because that's where the counselors could talk to the ladies coming in. We had counselors always. Whenever we rescued, we always had somebody to talk and give them an option. And so we had counselors there. But they had us out. What they did is they concentrated all the police at the back door. They just left us sitting in the front. And we didn't have more than 30 minutes or so for the counselors to talk to me because they opened the back door. They just punched a line through it, opened the back door. We had, they had people locked and all kinds of things to delay, but we just weren't able to hold it. And so I had decided at that point that it's okay to break a law, man's law, if you can save a baby. It's okay to break a law that says you're trespassing, because firemen do it. Firemen break through a door, or you go into a door. So I'd figured out. I'm kind of a simple guy, but But if a fireman can do it to save a life, I can just sit in front of the door as long as I don't use violence. And so we didn't use violence. We prayed. We all agreed before we even were part of anything with rescue was we absolutely would not be violent. We just let them. We wouldn't do what they say. We wouldn't walk away from the baby. If the baby is going to be saved by us just being dragged away, well, we'd be dragged. And that's the way we were. We were dragged away every time. That's just what we did. They'd drag us away. And if we were locked together, they'd have to cut the locks. I was locked neck to somebody, and they'd get this side cutter, and they'd start, sparks would going everywhere, and they'd cut that lock off. And first couple times it was kind of scary, but it was nothing, once you got used to it. And so that's what we did. And we had these pipes that we made that you could put your hands in the pipe, and it'd go up to your armpit, and the other person put a hand in the pipe. We called them Steubenville wedding rings, because you put your hands together and they couldn't pull you apart. I mean, they could stretch your arms, but they couldn't pull you apart. They'd try and try and try, and you'd delay things for a long time, just like that. And then we did it through the base of a car or something like that. They really had a problem with that. So we were able to delay like that, but nothing violent. We never would do anything violent. But we saved babies, lots of them. And that really made me happy. But when we got down to 18 and they take us out in 20 to 30 minutes, I couldn't break the law anymore. And I was telling Father, I said, unless we can get more people, I can't do this. And Father said, well, we got to just try as hard as we can. Well, he couldn't get enough. And after I quit, he was unable to get people. He continued to try, but he couldn't get enough people. They couldn't stay in jail for 3 months, I was retired. It didn't make any difference. My kids, Mary and Nancy were doing a day. We had enough money coming in, so I could do it. So anyhow, that's what we did. And then at that point, I said, I can't break the law anymore. So I got my son out of the hospital, and I built a room for him where he could stay, because he was grown by then. So I was taking care of him, and so I decided that if I couldn't go to jail, I couldn't rescue, the least I could do is pray an hour a day. So I went to church at St. A's, and I prayed for an hour a day, and it was probably 3 months that I was praying. And I got a call from a guy named Lowell Staubom, a hero here. He's actually the only pro-life Democrat I think I ever knew. The only one in Napa, I think. Anyhow, he was a school teacher back then, and he was about to retire. Maybe he has retired. But he was walking around and praying around a person that was doing abortions across the street from St. Mary, from Our Lady of the hospital. See, my memory's going. Queen of the Valley. He was praying, just praying, and he says, "Can't you come down and pray with me?" He said, "I'm all alone down here." And I said, "Well, I guess I can pray there as good as I can pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament. God's everywhere, and I'll try. But I really do prefer praying in front of the Blessed Sacrament, but I'll come down there." So I came down and I prayed with him for a week, and maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I don't know, something happened, and he left and didn't come back. So I prayed down there alone for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years, and she quit. Well, in the meantime, Planned Parenthood had opened a clinic down on the street. So I decided to go down and pray in front of Planned Parenthood. And I think that was something like 30 years ago. I don't know, about 30 years ago they started. And so I just prayed down there for an hour every day. And it just came to me that politics didn't work. Direct action didn't work. I said, "Lord, I don't know what to do. And so I'm just gonna pray." And I said, "You do it. Whatever it is. If you can think of something for me to do, Lord, I'll do anything. Other than I'm not gonna. I don't think you want me to be violent." So I prayed in front of Planned Parenthood, and what I did, I met people like Tony, came from the South. Well, they'd been praying for years. They were old timers in this thing, and I was just so proud. They'd come and pray, and then Colby Academy had, I discovered, had a kind of a, they almost every week they try to get a little group of students to come down and they'd pray, and it was in the late afternoon after school was out, and so they were praying down there. So it was kind of gradually I met pro-life people that were praying and trying to figure out what to do, and I just said, Lord, there's got to be something to do, and I don't know, it must have been 15 years when I heard about 40 Days for Life through Sally Fisher. Sally Fisher lived in Sacramento, but she was the daughter of a friend, and she came to St. Apollinaris, and she had heard from her dad that I was praying in front of Planned Parenthood. She'd heard a little about me being in rescue and stuff, and so she met me outside of St. Apollinaris after Sunday Mass. And she said, "You got to come to Sacramento. We're having 40 Days for Life." And I said, "What's that?" She told me what it was, and I said, "Boy, that really sounds good." I said, "But I don't do anything unless I know what it is." I said, "I'm not going to just." She said, "Well, come and pray with us." And I said, "I can do that." So and she said, "That's all we do. We just pray." Well, I went there and I met Wynette Sills, who is absolutely a California hero in pro-life. She was a counselor there for years, just like I'd been praying. Well, she had a carpenter's apron, and she had pro-life stuff stuck in that carpenter's apron, and she'd stand out in front of that thing all by herself and pray until somebody drove in. When they drove in, she had a spiel, and she'd talk to them and give them literature, and she was saving babies. And she was doing what Marcia was doing down in San Jose and was trying to do up here, but Marcia, she was alone, and 20 would come with her. And anyhow, I was still just praying. I wasn't a guy to talk to women going into the clinic. I just didn't think God wanted me to do that. Not that it wasn't good. I just said I wouldn't be good at it. I wouldn't. I'd probably scare him to death, be an old military guy. So I met with Wynette Sills, and that was the first 40 Days for Life. And it was the first national one. They'd done 2 or 3 of them before that. Locally, they'd done them for a whole 40 days, and then they'd done, I think, another one, and somewhere in the south, I might have been New Mexico or somewhere, they had somebody asked them how to do it, and they did that one, and then they decided to go national. And Wynette heard about it and said, "We're going to do it here." And so she started it, the first one, and I said, I really think that's something I would like to do. I said, that's the answer that God has. That's the answer. It's prayer, but it's not just prayer. It's prayer and fasting and being a public witness to the sanctity of life. I said, 40 Days for Life has an answer, and I've been looking for that answer for 15 years here, praying for Planned Parenthood. Thank you, God. I said, Wynette, can I be on your team just so I can get the literature? And I'll come up here and pray too, but I really want to have that literature so I can tell people in Napa this is something to do. And so I came back and I talked to Howard Hopp. And Howard went with me. We both got on that team, and we got the literature, and God had it set up. It was really amazing. I was on the pro-life, as soon as I got to Napa, I joined the pro-life committee, and the Riley sisters had been doing it for years. They were the pro-life people here at Napa for the St. Apollinaris. So I'd been meeting with them as the church pro-life team. So there's 3 of us on this team. And sometimes, we'd recruit, get 3 or 4 or 5 extra people, and then they'd be gone. Because there wasn't much you could do in the pro-life area except support birthright, and we still do that. I believe in birthright. God bless them. They've been there for so long. Betty Sweet was a pro-life hero. She was gone all the way back to Washington, D.C. and recognized as a pro-life hero by the president. So anyhow, that's another subject, but I'm so proud to know her. Well, Howard and I decided this is something we wanted to do, and so I typed up something and got this literature together, and we had a little packet, and we were going to present it to the parish. And as it happened, the pro-life people in St. Apollinaris and St. John's were all alone. Howard was the pro-life person there, and he was a committee of one. And Dolores Fisher was a pro-life person in St. Thomas, and she was a committee of one. And so the three churches got together, and Deacon Frank Dahl had taken over when the Riley sisters had to step down because they had personal things going on, health things, and stepped down. And so the deacon came, and he was leading St. Apollinaris. So we had 5 of us at that meeting. It was the first time that had ever happened, as far as I know, that we had all of us at that meeting to talk about where we're going to go from here. And 40 Days for Life was ready. We handed out all the literature, and we had it unanimous. All the parishes, and all 5 of us said yes. And we did it the next fall. And that was the first one here, and that was, what, 3 times ago? And we've done it 23 times now since then. It was so exciting because it was God's answer at exactly the right time. Just the perfect answer. Prayer added to fasting. That was a big thing for me. I had never done fasting or deliberately for pro-life. Just dumb. Didn't think of it. Churches taught it from time of, 5,000 years ago. They started fasting, and the Judeo-Christian communities lived with that. Why didn't I think of it? I don't know why I didn't. And Randy never thought of it. I don't think Randy ever thought of it. And Terry started rescue. So that's the story. We started it, and the first time, I don't know, we had a huge crowd. I could probably find the numbers. I kept track of everything. Every meeting we had meetings before we started 40 Days for Life. We met in I think there was people from Yountville and Santa Helena and Fairfield, and we invited everybody to come, anybody that would come, and we set it up. We had 5 or 6 people on the committee doing each different things, and they really were excited, and we had a huge group. The first pro-life thing that was really successful. I was ecstatic. The only thing that's been better for me in the years, I don't know how many years it's been now, a dozen years must be about a dozen years that we've done this work. The only thing that's been better to me is when I was replaced by a team that's done so much better and has got this thing going, and we now have a Napa Valley Women's Clinic that's next door to Planned Parenthood. I've been praying for that for 30 years, and look at it. It's a gorgeous thing, and these people that have taken over Napa Valley Culture of Life and 40 Days for Life have just they've blessed my life in a way that better than the first time that we had 40 Days for Life. It's just wonderful, and so I don't know. I'm just so happy seeing what's happening with pro-life, and now we're here, and we need to get the word out that this is such an opportunity. It just has everything it needs. 40 Days for Life is the answer that God has given us, and I don't care if they put a boundary up 40 yards or 1,000 yards. I don't care what they do against us. Prayer and fasting and public witness is the answer that God wants. He sent those apostles out not to be alone. He says every one of you is a priest who is baptized. You're baptized as a priest, and you're to go out and give the good news to his people. And so that's on the road. That's gonna go, and God's got a way of getting things done, and so He's turned a catastrophe of abortion into a vehicle to tell people there's a better way of doing things. Prayer and fasting and being a good witness. Be a good witness. We have the good news. It's life. Our Constitution started at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness can't happen without life. And you can't have liberty if you don't have life. So we have the answer. Prayer, fasting, public witness. And it's that easy. You don't have to really do anything. Just pray. And anybody can pray. I've prayed with, I can't think of a person from a Christian denomination that hasn't come up to me and prayed with me and prayed over me. And I accept anybody who will pray. I'm there with them. And if somebody's angry with me being out there, that's even better than just walking by. I love to have somebody angry with me. It's the best thing in the world for them to tell me why they're mad at me. And it usually takes them several minutes, maybe even more. And just listen. And they just kind of peter out in the end. Most of the time, the people that are angry, they don't know why they're angry. They don't know. I say, look, I feel as strong as you do. I said, all I ask is that you just let me pray. I'm not even asking that you quit supporting Planned Parenthood. I'm not asking it, I understand that I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm a kind of a hard-headed, hard to convince. And I got convinced a long time ago that God wants life. He makes it. He doesn't want us killing babies. I got convinced a long time ago, but I understand if people come to a different conclusion. They say it's not a baby, or they say it's invading me. I've heard so many arguments, and they really believe them, and I really believe me. All I ask, just tolerate me, Let me pray. Don't tell me I can't pray. I said, please don't tell me that. Don't tell me I can't pray right here. Please don't tell me that. I said, just tolerate me. Be tolerant of me. I said, that's all I ask. And usually, by the time we get done, they say, I understand now why you're there. Usually that's just listen. And I do. So I'm so glad. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really am not very good at telling a story, but it's a story I've wanted to tell, and thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you, Jesus, for this time with my brothers to rethink some of the great opportunities that you've put into my life. The fact that you've given me a time on the ranch to be carefree and a wild young kid. The fact that you brought me home so many times, Lord, and now I think in my life, all of those times that you've had to forgive me for the wounds that I've put in my soul, and those wounds are all healed now. I am healed, and you've been so good to me over these years, healing those wounds that I've put in there, and those scars. I'm looking forward to those scars because they show your absolute perfect love for me, that you loved me even when I was unlovable, even when I was doing things that were hurtful to our relationship, and you knew that I was just hurting myself, and yet you've healed me, and those scars are evidence of that. Like the scars in your hands, I'm going to wear those scars through all eternity if you let me, just to be one that people can look at and say, ooh, look at that. And they can say, look how Jesus loved him. And so thank you for that, all those times. And then the other times when you've blessed me with people who would come and pray with me, and people who would teach me, people who would lift me up when I'm feeling discouraged or difficult, people like Howard Hopp that kept me on the straight and narrow and reminded me when I was talking too much. Need to make the meeting a little shorter. All of those good things that you put in my life, I just thank you for all of that. And at this time in my life, I'm able to do that kind of as a capstone of a life, and watch the things that were so important to me. I was just hoping so much, watching those all come to fulfillment, and in persons of people that have taken over for Howard and me, and gone on to do really great things. I'm just thinking of Jerry and that team, and thinking of Julie and the Napa Women's Center and that team, I'm thinking of the 40 Days for Life with a whole new team doing all these things, and I'm just thankful, Lord, and I'd like to give public witness to the fact that you really take good care of the people that are yours, and that you love us so much that you sort of overcome our own weaknesses, and you knew them and you know them now, and you overcome them, and you put us on that right track, and you fill in the gaps, and I just want to thank you for that, and I just hope that what we're doing here today can be a blessing for the people that have the courage and willingness to take the time to take a look at it. Just pray for them, pray for each of them, that this can be transformed from whatever it is into a real blessing by the artistry of these people and the willingness to invest the time and energy in it. Thank you, Lord, for this blessing this day.